Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and watched Earth get smaller through the big window. The blue planet that had been home to billions of humans was now just a dot of light among the stars. His hands gripped the metal rail as he thought about what had just happened to his people. 3 days ago, the Galactic Council had made their final choice about humanity. They said humans were too dangerous to live among the other species in space. Admiral Lisa Carter had been the one to bring the bad news back from the council meeting on Zentara Prime. She walked into the Earth Defense Command Center with her face hard as stone and her uniform perfect as always. "They want us gone," she told the room full of human leaders. 30 days to pack up everything and leave council space. No more talking, no more chances to prove ourselves better. Dr. Alex Rodriguez had tried to argue with the council before this happened. He was Earth's best scientist who studied alien life, and he knew more about other species than almost anyone. He had spent weeks preparing his speech about how humans could change and become better neighbors in the galaxy. But when he stood up in the great council hall and started talking, most of the alien representatives just looked away or talked among themselves. The Zalani High Arbiter Vexthanor was the worst of them all. He was tall like a tree and covered in silver scales that caught the light. When Rodriguez finished his speech about human progress and asked for one more chance, Vexthanor just turned his back and walked away without saying a single word. The message was clear. The council had decided, and nothing would change their minds. The 30 days that followed were the strangest in human history. Every human ship in space got the order to come home. Research stations that had been studying strange new worlds for years started packing up their equipment. Trade ships that carried goods between human and alien worlds turned around and headed back to Earth. Diplomatic offices that had worked hard to build friendships with other species closed their doors and said goodbye. Jake had been running cargo between the human colony on Kepler 442b and the Krellian trading posts. The Krellians were big, purple creatures who were good at business and had always been fair to humans. When Jake told his Krellian contact named Zextar that all human ships were leaving, the alien looked confused and sad. "But why so fast?" Zextar asked through the translation device. "Human traders are honest and work hard. We do not want you to go." Jake wanted to explain, but his orders were clear. No long goodbyes, no explanations, no arguments. Just pack up and leave quietly. "Orders from Earth," was all he could say. The evacuation was like nothing anyone had ever seen before. Hundreds of human ships moved through space carrying millions of people and all their belongings back to Earth or the few human colonies outside Council territory. The aliens who watched expected anger and threats. They thought humans would fight back or at least complain loudly about being kicked out. Instead, humans did something that surprised everyone. They left without making a fuss. No angry messages were sent to alien governments. No human leaders gave speeches about unfair treatment. No ship stayed behind to cause trouble. They just gathered their things and went home like guests who knew. When the party was over, Commander Ben Hayes was in charge of the last human military ship to leave Council space. His job was to make sure all the humans got out safely and on time. As his ship crossed the border into the empty space between Council territory and human space, his communication officer started getting messages from different alien species. Some of the messages were from aliens who were happy to see humans go. They thought space would be more peaceful without the loud and unpredictable humans around. But other messages came from aliens who were sad or worried. They had worked with humans and knew that humans were good at solving problems that other species found too hard. Hayes read every message, but answered none of them. His orders from Earth were clear. Complete communication silence with all Council species starting the moment they left Council space. If aliens wanted to talk to humans, they would get no answer. Dr. Rachel Kim was one of the last scientists to leave her research station in the outer rim of Council space. She had been studying dangerous creatures called void hunters that lived in the dark space between star systems. Her work was important because these creatures sometimes attacked ships and colonies. As she packed up her equipment, she noticed that the void hunters were moving closer to inhabited worlds. "Without human patrol ships out here, there's nothing to keep them away," she told her assistant as they loaded the last of their research onto the transport ship. But there was no time to warn anyone. The orders were to leave immediately and stay silent. When the last human ship crossed into free space, the galaxy became a different place. 50 years of human presence ended not with a bang, but with silence. The other species had gotten exactly what they asked for, a galaxy without humans. Now they would learn what that really meant. 5 years passed since the humans left Council space, and most alien species thought they had made the right choice. The galaxy felt calmer without the unpredictable humans around. Trade ships moved between worlds without worrying about human competitors who always seemed to find new and strange ways to do business. Diplomatic meetings happened without humans asking difficult questions or suggesting ideas that made everyone uncomfortable. On Zentara Prime, the Council met every month as they always had. The Great Hall, where representatives from dozens of species gathered, seemed more peaceful now. Councillor Thexamal from the Aurelian Federation noticed that arguments between species happened less often. Without humans there to suggest wild new solutions or ask why things had to be done the old way, everything moved more smoothly. The Zalani High Arbiter Vexthanor was particularly pleased with how things had turned out. He had been the one to push hardest for removing humans from Council space. In his opinion, humans were too young and too aggressive to understand how civilized species should behave. Now, 5 years later, he felt proud that his decision had brought peace to the galaxy. But not everyone was happy about the changes. On the trading world of Kellis Station, Jextar, the Krellian merchant, found himself struggling with problems he had never faced before. When humans were around, they had helped him figure out complex shipping routes between different star systems. Humans were good at looking at a problem and finding a solution that no one else had thought of. Now Jextar had to deliver goods to 17 different worlds, but the routes kept getting more expensive and taking longer. The other species who had taken over human trade routes were careful and followed all the rules, but they were not creative. They did things the same way their grandparents had done things, even when those ways were slow and wasteful. Commander Ben Hayes was now working at the Deep Space Research Institute, a new human facility built just outside Council territory. His job was to watch what happened in the galaxy and report back to Earth. What he saw worried him more each day. The void hunters that Dr. Rachel Kim had been studying were getting bolder. These dangerous creatures lived in the dark spaces between star systems and hunted ships that traveled alone. When human patrol fleets had been active in the outer rim, they kept the void hunters scared and hiding. But now, with only alien patrol ships watching the borders, the hunters were moving closer to inhabited worlds. Dr. Rachel Kim worked at the same research station as Hayes. She had been tracking void hunter movements for 5 years, and the pattern was clear. "They are testing the defenses," she told Director Paul Martinez during their weekly meeting. "Every month they get a little closer to the shipping lanes. The alien patrol ships are not aggressive enough to scare them away." The alien species had always been more careful than humans. They preferred to avoid fights rather than start them. This worked well for keeping peace between civilized species, but it did not work well for dealing with creatures that only understood strength. The void hunters saw the careful alien patrols as weak and started planning bigger attacks. On the Krellian homeworld, Trade Coordinator Elena Vasquez had been replaced by a committee of 3 Krellian officials. Elena had been a human who understood how to balance the needs of different species when arranging trade deals. She knew that the insect-like Chithari needed certain minerals that the rock-eating granite folk could provide, but only if the timing was exactly right. She also knew that the energy beings called luminants could transport goods faster than anyone else, but only if you asked them politely and offered them interesting stories as payment. The committee of Krellians was very smart and worked very hard, but they did not have Elena's creative mind. They tried to arrange trades the same way trades had always been arranged. This meant that some species could not get the goods they needed when they needed them. Slowly, the carefully balanced trade network that had kept dozens of worlds supplied with everything they needed started to develop problems. Dr. Amy Foster was working on humanity's new research world called New Terra, far from Council space. Her specialty was studying how different species could work together to solve scientific problems. Before the exile, she had worked with alien scientists on projects that no single species could complete alone. The combination of human creativity and alien knowledge had led to amazing discoveries. Now, working only with human scientists, she found that some problems were much harder to solve. Humans were good at thinking of new ideas, but they did not have the deep knowledge that some alien species had developed over thousands of years. At the same time, she started getting desperate messages from her old alien colleagues. The messages came through secret channels because official communication between humans and council species was forbidden. Her former partner, a crystal-based being named Shard of Morning Light, was begging for help with a disease that was killing silicon-based life forms across 3 star systems. The alien scientists could not figure out how to stop it because they thought about the problem the same way they had always thought about similar problems. Amy knew that human scientists would approach the disease differently. They would ask strange questions and try solutions that seemed crazy but might actually work. But she could not help because Earth's government had ordered all humans to maintain complete silence with council species. The economic problems got worse as the years passed. Without human innovation in manufacturing and resource processing, many worlds found that they could not produce goods as efficiently as before. The humans had always been good at looking at a factory or a mine and figuring out how to make it work better. They would try new techniques and take risks that other species avoided. The careful alien species preferred methods that were proven and safe. This meant that production stayed steady but never improved. Meanwhile, the demand for goods kept growing as populations increased and new colonies were established. Slowly, shortages began to appear on worlds throughout Council space. On 12 different worlds, food production started falling behind what the population needed. The humans had developed new farming techniques that could grow more food in less space, but those techniques required constant experimentation and adjustment. The alien farmers tried to copy human methods, but without humans there to help them adapt the techniques to each world's unique conditions, the systems stopped working properly. Fleet Admiral Kextor of the Zalani High Command was beginning to face problems that worried him deeply. The Zalani were proud warriors with traditions going back thousands of years. They had always been the strongest military force in Council space, and their tactics had won countless battles against pirates and raiders. But now, reports were coming in from the Outer Rim about strange activities. Ancient enemies that had been quiet for centuries were showing signs of movement. The most troubling reports mentioned the Devourers, a mysterious enemy that appeared every 1,000 years to consume entire star systems before disappearing again. Chebindidi, tactical databases that included human strategic innovations, had not been updated for 5 years. Humans had always been good at developing new ways to fight because they thought about warfare differently than other species. They were willing to try tactics that seemed impossible or dangerous, and sometimes those crazy ideas worked better than traditional methods. Now, as Admiral Kextor studied the reports about increased enemy activity, he realized that the galaxy might need those human tactical innovations sooner than anyone had expected. The 7th year after humanity's departure brought the first real crisis that shook the Council's confidence. It started with reports from 3 different shipping lanes on the same day. Pirate fleets that had been small and scattered for decades suddenly launched coordinated attacks on major trade routes. The attacks were planned perfectly and happened at exactly the same time across thousands of light years of space. The pirates called themselves the Marauder Coalition, and they had been watching Council space carefully. They saw that human patrol ships no longer protected the trade routes, and that alien patrol ships followed predictable patterns. Where human captains like Steve Chen had once used surprise tactics and creative strategies to keep pirates scared, and scattered, the alien patrols stuck to regular schedules and standard procedures. Captain Steve Chen had been famous throughout Council space for his ability to think like a criminal. He would study pirate behavior and then show up where they least expected him. His tactics were often criticized by other species as too aggressive or too risky, but they worked. Pirates never knew when or where Chen might appear, so they stayed, hidden in the dark spaces between systems. Now Chen was gone, along with all the other human patrol captains. The alien species that took over patrol duties were brave and dedicated, but they did everything by the book. They followed routes that had been planned years in advance and responded to threats using standard military procedures. This made them easy for the pirates to predict and avoid. The Marauder Coalition struck like lightning. They captured the main supply station at Kepler Junction, taking control of the most important fuel depot in the sector. At the same time, other Marauder fleets hit the medical supply convoy heading to the Rigel colonies and the food transport ships bound for the mining worlds of the Vega system. Within hours, 3 different regions of Council space were cut off from essential supplies. The Council's military response came quickly, but it was exactly what the Marauders expected. Fleet Admiral Kextor sent his best ships to retake Kepler Junction using classic Zalani battle tactics. The attack was brave and well-planned according to traditional military thinking, but the pirates had studied those same tactics for months. They knew exactly how Zalani ships would approach and where they would position themselves for battle. The result was a disaster. The Zalani fleet walked into a trap and lost 3 cruisers before they could retreat. The pirates sent a message to all Council worlds demanding tribute in exchange for safe passage through the shipping lanes. If the Council did not pay, more attacks would follow. Dr. Amy Foster received the news about the Marauder attacks while working in her laboratory on New Terra. She knew that Captain Chen would have handled the situation completely differently. Instead of sending a big fleet to attack the main pirate base, Chen would have found some unexpected way to turn the pirates against each other or cut off their supplies. Human tactics were often strange and seemed impossible, but they worked because humans thought about problems in ways that no one else expected. The quantum plague that was killing silicon-based life forms had also gotten worse. Dr. Foster's old colleague Shard of Morning Light managed to send another desperate message through the secret communication channels. The disease had spread to 5 more star systems, and millions of crystal beings were dying. The alien scientists had tried every traditional cure they could think of, but nothing worked. Amy stared at the message and felt helpless. She knew that human scientists would approach the problem from a completely different angle. They might try using carbon-based solutions to fix silicon-based problems, or they might look for connections that other species would never consider. But she was forbidden from helping, and even if she tried to send advice, there was no way to test her theories without working directly with the alien scientists. The economic problems that had been building for years finally reached a breaking point. On the industrial world of Mechanicus Prime, the main manufacturing complex shut down when their efficiency dropped below sustainable levels. The factory had been designed by human engineers who used creative solutions to overcome the planet's harsh environment. Without human maintenance and innovation, the systems gradually broke down. 12 worlds now faced serious food shortages. The alien farmers had tried their best to copy human agricultural techniques, but farming was more than just following instructions. It required constant adaptation to changing conditions, creative problem-solving when things went wrong, and the willingness to try new approaches when old ones stopped working. These were all things that humans excelled at, but other species found difficult. Director Paul Martinez at the Deep Space Research Institute was getting reports that worried him more each day. The Void Hunters were no longer just testing defenses. They had started attacking isolated colonies and research stations. 3 different outposts had gone silent in the past month, and when rescue ships arrived, they found nothing but empty buildings and signs of a struggle. Dr. Rachel Kim analyzed the attack patterns and found something terrifying. "They are learning," she told Martinez during an emergency meeting. "Each attack is more sophisticated than the last. They study how we defend ourselves and then adapt their tactics to overcome our defenses." The alien patrol ships that had replaced human forces were doing their best, but they were always one step behind. They would develop a defense against one type of Void Hunter attack, only to discover that the creatures had already evolved a new attack method. Humans had been better at dealing with this kind of enemy because they were just as good at adapting and changing as the Void Hunters themselves. On Zentara Prime, Counselor Thexamal was starting to question whether removing humans from Council space had been the right decision. The emergency sessions were happening more often now, and each meeting brought worse news. The careful, peaceful galaxy that everyone had wanted was falling apart without the chaotic but effective human presence. The breaking point came when the ancient enemy known as the Devourers sent their first scout ships into Council space. These creatures had been sleeping in the dark void between galaxies for 1,000 years, but something had awakened them early. Their technology was beyond anything the Council had ever seen, and their biomechanical ships seemed to adapt and evolve even during battle. Fleet Admiral Kextor studied the reports from the first contact with Devourer scouts and felt a chill of fear. The traditional Zalani tactics that had worked for millennia were completely useless against an enemy that could change and adapt faster than any living creature. The tactical innovations that humans had developed during their time in Council space might be the only hope for developing new strategies to fight this ancient threat. But the humans were gone, and they had made it clear that they wanted nothing to do with Council space or its problems. The species that had demanded human removal now faced the consequences of their decision. The galaxy they had wanted to protect from human influence was crumbling, and the humans who might have saved it were nowhere to be found. High Arbiter Vex Thanor stood in his private chambers looking out at the stars and wondered if he had made the biggest mistake in Zalani history. The peace and order he had worked so hard to preserve was disappearing, and the chaotic but creative humans who might have found solutions to these new problems were maintaining their silence in the dark spaces beyond Council territory. The first. Cracks in the Council's paradise had become deep fractures, and more disasters were coming. The question was whether anyone would be left alive to see if the Council's pride was worth more than the galaxy's survival. 10 years had passed since humanity left Council space, and the galaxy was burning. The Devourer advance fleets had consumed 3 entire star systems, leaving nothing behind but empty space where billions of beings had once lived. Their biomechanical ships moved through space like a plague, adapting to every defense the Council threw at them and growing stronger with each victory. General Nick Parker stood in the war room of humanity's newest military facility on the colony world of New Sparta. The walls were covered with tactical displays showing the Devourer advance and the failing Council defenses. Parker had once been Earth's liaison to the Council Defense Initiative, working closely with alien military leaders to develop new strategies for protecting Council space. Now he was training human soldiers for the war that everyone knew was coming. "They fight like nothing we have ever seen," Parker told his staff as they studied the latest battle reports. "Traditional military doctrine assumes your enemy will follow certain rules or patterns. The Devourers do not follow any rules. They adapt their tactics during battle, sometimes changing their entire strategy in the middle of a fight." The reports were terrifying. Council fleets would engage Devourer ships using proven battle tactics, only to watch their enemy change shape and behavior in real time. Ships that started a battle using energy weapons would suddenly switch to kinetic attacks. Vessels that appeared to be scouts would transform into heavy battleships. Formation flying that had worked for centuries became useless when the enemy could predict every move. Dr. Sarah Williams was working at the financial center on humanity's trade world of New Geneva when the economic collapse of Council space reached its final stage. She had once designed the interspecies credit exchange, a complex system that allowed dozens of different species to trade with each other despite having completely different economic systems. The system required constant adjustment and creative problem-solving to keep working, but it had maintained stability for decades. Now, watching the financial reports from Council space, Sarah could see that the system was falling apart. Without human economists to manage the complex algorithms and adapt to changing conditions, the credit exchange had become rigid and inefficient. Species that depended on trade with other worlds were being cut off from essential goods. Entire economies were collapsing as the carefully balanced system that had taken years to build crumbled in months. "It is like watching a clock fall apart," Sarah explained to her assistant as they monitored the crisis. "Every piece depends on every other piece. When one part stops working, everything else starts to fail too." The refugee crisis had reached humanity's borders. Desperate families from 19 different species were fleeing the advancing devourer fleets and the economic collapse of their homeworlds. Their ships appeared at the edge of human space in growing numbers, filled with beings who had lost everything and had nowhere else to go. Commander Lisa Rodriguez faced an impossible choice as head of border control. Earth's government had been clear about maintaining isolation from Council species, but the refugees were not soldiers or diplomats. They were families with children, elderly beings who could barely travel, and wounded survivors from worlds that no longer existed. "What do we do with them?" Rodriguez asked Director Martinez during their daily briefing. "Our orders are to maintain isolation, but these are not politicians or military leaders. These are people who will die if we turn them away." The reports from Council space got worse every day. The Krellian homeworld had fallen to a combined attack by Marauder pirates and Void Hunter packs. The planet's defense fleets had been scattered across the galaxy trying to protect trade routes, leaving their home system vulnerable. When the attack came, there were not enough ships to defend the billions of Krellians living on the surface. The proud Aurelian Federation lost their primary industrial complex when a quantum cascade failure destroyed 3 orbital manufacturing stations. Human engineers had designed safety systems that could prevent this type of disaster, but the aliens who took over maintenance did not understand the creative solutions that humans had used. They followed the technical manuals exactly, but the manuals could not account for every possible situation. Fleet Admiral Kextor of the Zalani High Command was fighting a losing war against enemies that his people's ancient traditions could not defeat. The Zalani had been warriors for thousands of years, and their tactics had been proven in countless battles. But those tactics were designed to fight against other honorable warriors who followed similar rules of combat. The Devourers followed. No rules. They would retreat when victory seemed certain, only to attack from an unexpected direction hours later. They would sacrifice entire fleets to gather information about Council defenses, then use that information to develop new weapons and tactics. They fought like humans had always fought, using creativity and unpredictability as weapons, but they did it without any concern for honor or the rules of civilized warfare. "We need new strategies," Kextor told his war council during an emergency meeting. "Everything we know about warfare is useless against this enemy. They adapt faster than we can plan, and they think about battle in ways that our traditions do not prepare us for." The truth that no one wanted to admit was that humans had always fought like the Devourers fought. They used unconventional tactics, adapted quickly to changing situations, and found creative solutions to impossible problems. The difference was that humans did these things to protect life and preserve peace, while the Devourers did them to consume and destroy. High Arbiter, Vex Thanor stood in the ruins of what had once been the Council's most important research facility. The Devourers had destroyed it not for any strategic value, but simply to study how Council scientists worked. They consumed knowledge the same way they consumed star systems, taking everything useful and leaving nothing behind. We drove away, the only species that could match them, Vexathanor admitted to his aide as they surveyed the damage. Humans think like the Devourers think, but they use that thinking to create instead of destroy. We called them dangerous and sent them away, and now we face something truly dangerous with no one to help us. The reports from across Council space painted a picture of complete collapse. The Marauder coalition controlled major shipping lanes and was demanding tribute from dozens of worlds. The Void Hunters had grown bold enough to attack inhabited planets. The quantum plague was spreading to new species, and without human scientists to develop creative solutions, millions more would die. But the worst threat was still the Devourers. Their advanced fleets had finished studying Council defenses and were preparing for a major assault. Intelligence reports suggested that they were building new types of ships specifically designed to counter every defensive strategy the Council had used so far. Dr. Tony Garcia, working at Humanity's Advanced Research Facility on New Kepler, made a discovery that changed everything. He had been studying fragments of devourer technology recovered from battle sites, trying to understand how their biomechanical systems worked. What he found was more terrifying than anyone had imagined. They are not just expanding randomly, Garcia announced during an emergency scientific conference. They are learning from every battle, cataloging every defensive strategy, and developing counters to every tactic they encounter. When they finish with Council space, they will come for us next, and they will know exactly how to defeat every defensive system we have. The revelation spread through human space like wildfire. Humanity had thought they were safe in their isolation, protected by distance and secrecy from the Council's problems. But the Devourers were not just conquering Council space. They were using it as a testing ground to prepare for war against humanity. President Miranda Chang called an emergency session of the United Earth government. The debate was intense and emotional. 10 years of isolation had allowed humanity to focus on internal development, pushing their technology and society forward dramatically. They were stronger than ever, but many people felt that the Council's suffering was deserved punishment for the injustice of humanity's banishment. They threw us out, argued Senator Robert Kim during the heated debate. They said we were too dangerous for civilized space. Now they are facing real danger, and suddenly, they want our help. Why should we risk human lives to save people who treated us like criminals? But other voices spoke up for intervention. The Devourers will come for us eventually, warned General Parker in his testimony to the Assembly. If we let them finish consuming Council space, they will be stronger when they reach our borders. Our best chance of survival is to stop them now while they are still learning. The tide of opinion shifted when Dr. Garcia presented his full analysis of devourer capabilities. The biomechanical creatures were not just weapons of destruction. They were the ultimate adaptive predators, designed to consume and learn from everything they encountered. Every species they conquered made them stronger and smarter. Every defensive strategy they defeated taught them how to overcome similar defenses in the future. If humanity waited for the Devourers to finish with Council space, they would face an enemy that had learned how to defeat every known form of resistance. The choice was clear. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was held in a fortified bunker deep beneath the surface of Zentara Prime. The beautiful chamber where representatives had once gathered in peace was now too dangerous to use. Devourer scout ships had been spotted in the outer system, and everyone knew that the final assault on the Council homeworld was only days away. 47 species were represented in the bunker, but that number told its own story. The Council had once included over 80 different species. The others were gone, their homeworlds consumed by the Devourers or abandoned as refugees fled the advancing enemy. The survivors huddled in the underground chamber like frightened children, their pride and dignity stripped away by 10 years of disasters. Counselor Prime Yexathara stood before the assembly with her usually melodious voice strained by exhaustion and fear. The elegant celestial being who had once spoken with confidence about the future of galactic civilization now struggled to maintain hope that there would be any future at all. "We face the end of everything we have built," she announced to the gathered representatives. "Our fleets are scattered, our economies have collapsed, and our ancient enemy grows stronger with each system they consume. We have one choice left, and it is a choice that many of us swore we would never make." The debate that followed was unlike anything in Council history. Species that had barely survived the past 10 years argued desperately about whether to abandon their pride and ask for help from the humans they had banished. Some representatives insisted that humanity had abandoned the galaxy in its hour of need and owed them nothing. Others pointed out that humanity had been forced to leave and had every right to refuse help to those who had rejected them. The Zalani delegation was the most conflicted. High Arbiter Vexathanor had been the strongest supporter of humanity's banishment, and now he faced the consequences of that decision. His proud warrior species was being systematically destroyed by an enemy they could not understand or defeat. Everything he had believed about military strategy and honorable combat was useless against the adaptive chaos of the Devourer fleets. "The humans fight like the Devourers fight," Vexthanor admitted to the council. "They use unpredictable tactics and creative strategies that our traditions cannot counter. We called this dangerous and sent them away. Now we face true danger, and we have no defense against it." The message to humanity was crafted carefully by a committee of diplomats who had once been skilled at interspecies communication. But years of crisis had worn down their abilities, and they struggled to find words that might convince humanity to help the people who had exiled them. The final message was brief, formal, and desperate. Request immediate consultation on Devourer. Threat analysis. Willing to discuss terms. Dr. Kevin Walsh received the message in his office at the Diplomatic Institute on Earth. He had been humanity's ambassador to the Council for 15 years before the banishment, and he understood alien psychology better than almost any other human. As he read the Council's request, he felt a mixture of sadness and irony. The proud species that had once dismissed human concerns were now begging for the help they had rejected. President Miranda Chang called another emergency session of the United Earth Government. The debate was even more intense than before, with the knowledge that humanity now held the power to decide the fate of the galaxy. Some representatives wanted to let the Council face the consequences of their choices. Others argued that helping the Council was humanity's moral duty, regardless of past injustices. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Tony Garcia had been working around the clock to analyze more Devourer technology fragments, and his latest discovery changed the entire discussion. He burst into the assembly chamber with data files that made everyone's blood run cold. "They are not just consuming Council space randomly," Garcia announced breathlessly. "They have a plan. Every species they encounter teaches them something new about galactic civilization. They are studying our technologies, our strategies, our weaknesses. When they finish with the Council, they will know exactly how to defeat us." The data Garcia presented was terrifying in its implications. The Devourers were using the Council species as test subjects, learning how different types of beings fought and thought and organized themselves. Each victory gave them new knowledge about how to attack similar species in the future. They were building a database of conquest that would make them nearly unstoppable when they finally turned their attention to humanity. "If we let them finish their experiments on Council space, they will come for us as the ultimate test," Garcia explained. "They will know our psychology, our technology, our tactics. We will be facing an enemy that has learned how to defeat every form of resistance we might offer." The vote was close, but humanity chose to act. The species that had been exiled from the galaxy would return to save the civilization that had rejected them. It was not about forgiveness or friendship. It was about survival and the recognition that some threats were too dangerous for any single species to face alone. Ambassador Walsh was chosen to deliver humanity's response to the Council. The journey to Zentara Prime took 3 days, and Walsh spent the time preparing for negotiations that would determine the future of galactic civilization. He knew that humanity held all the advantages now, but he also knew that demanding too much might doom everyone to destruction. The council chamber where Walsh had once pleaded for humanity's acceptance was now a bombed-out ruin. The meeting took place in the same underground bunker where the council had debated their desperate message. As Walsh entered the chamber, he saw representatives of species that had once looked down on humanity, now watching him with desperate hope. High Arbiter. Vexthanor approached Walsh before the formal session began. The proud Zalani warrior, who had once dismissed humanity's final appeal, now spoke with humility that would have been unthinkable 10 years earlier. "We were wrong about your species," Vexthanor said quietly. "We confused strength with aggression, creativity with chaos. We thought we were protecting the galaxy from human influence, but we nearly destroyed everything through our prejudice and fear." Walsh listened without anger or triumph. 10 years of exile had taught humanity patience and perspective. "Every species makes mistakes," he replied. "The measure of wisdom is learning from them and doing better in the future." The formal negotiations took place over 2 days, while Devourer scouts continued probing the outer defenses of Zentara Prime. Humanity's terms were harsh but fair. They demanded full voting rights in an expanded council, autonomous control over their sectors, and formal apologies for the unjust banishment. Most importantly, they insisted on changes to the council's decision-making process to prevent future discrimination against member species. But the most crucial discussions were about military strategy. General Parker arrived with a fleet of human warships equipped with technologies that had been developed during the 10 years of isolation. The ships were unlike anything the Council had ever seen, designed using the same adaptive principles that made the Devourers so dangerous. "We fight fire with fire," Parker explained to the combined military leadership. "The Devourers use unpredictable tactics and adaptive strategies, so will we, but we will use those methods to protect and preserve, not to consume and destroy." The plan Parker outlined was revolutionary and terrifying. It required unprecedented cooperation between species that had barely managed to work together even in peacetime. Human ships would lead assaults that conventional military wisdom said were impossible. Council fleets would provide support using tactics they had never trained for. Success would depend on every species abandoning their traditional approaches to warfare and trusting human leadership completely. Admiral Lisa Carter, now Supreme Commander of the Joint Defense Force, stood before the assembled representatives and delivered the final ultimatum. "The Devourers will reach Zentara Prime in less than 48 hours. We have one chance to stop them here, in this system, with the combined strength of every surviving species. If we fail, there will be no second chance. If we succeed, we build something new together." The representatives looked around the chamber at the faces of species that had been enemies, rivals, or strangers for thousands of years. The choice was clear: unite under human leadership or face extinction separately. One by one, they gave their consent to the most desperate military gamble in galactic history. As the combined fleets prepared for battle, everyone understood that the next few days would determine whether galactic civilization survived or whether the Devourers would consume everything that billions of beings had built over millennia of progress. Humanity had returned to save the galaxy that had rejected them, but salvation was far from certain. Ambassador Kevin Walsh stood in the rebuilt council chamber 6 months after the Battle of Zentara Prime, but everything had changed. The magnificent hall that had once showcased the pride of galactic civilization now bore the scars of war and reconstruction. Repair work was visible everywhere, but so were new additions that represented hope for a different future. The council itself was different too. Only 32 species had survived the Devourer crisis, but they had learned lessons that thousands of years of peace had never taught them. The representatives who gathered now understood that diversity was strength, not weakness, and that survival sometimes required trusting those who thought differently. The United Earth government accepts the terms of the new Galactic Accord, Walsh announced, his voice carrying across a chamber that hung on every word. Humanity rejoins galactic civilization not as supplicants seeking acceptance, but as equal. Partners in building something better than what came before. The terms humanity had negotiated were indeed harsh, but they had been earned through blood and sacrifice. Human fleets had spearheaded the desperate defense of Zentara Prime, using tactics that other species had considered impossible or insane. The battle had lasted 6 days and cost millions of lives, but it had stopped the Devourer advance and saved what remained of galactic civilization. Captain Jake Morrison now commanded the massive battleship Resilience, the flagship of humanity's new fleet. During the battle, he had led a strike force through the heart of the Devourer formation, using a navigation technique that violated every principle of safe space travel. The maneuver had brought his ships within range of the enemy mothership, but it had also exposed them to weapons that could have destroyed the entire human fleet. "We adapt or we die," Morrison had told his crew as they prepared for the impossible assault. "The Devourers think they know how we will attack because they have studied every battle we have ever fought. Today we show them something they have never seen before." The attack had succeeded because it was based on pure human intuition rather than military doctrine. Morrison's ships moved in patterns that made no sense according to traditional tactics, but they confused the Devourer targeting systems long enough for the strike force to penetrate the enemy's defenses. When human torpedoes finally struck the biomechanical mothership, the explosion sent shockwaves through the entire Devourer fleet. Dr. Rachel Kim's breakthrough in quantum biological warfare had provided the weapon that turned the tide of battle. Working with alien scientists who had finally overcome their pride and accepted human methods, she had developed a virus that was harmless to organic life but devastating to the Devourer biomechanical systems. The Devourers adapt by consuming and integrating other technologies, Kim had explained during the frantic research phase before the battle. But they cannot adapt to something that attacks the fundamental connection between their biological and mechanical components. It is like trying to adapt to having your brain disconnected from your body. The virus had spread through the Devourer fleet faster than their adaptive systems could compensate. Ships that had seemed invincible began losing cohesion as their biomechanical integration failed. Within hours, the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced was reduced to drifting hulks that posed no danger to anyone. But victory had come at a terrible cost. Entire star systems remained empty where the Devourers had consumed everything. Billions of beings had died in the 10 years of crisis that preceded humanity's return. The economic and social structures that had taken millennia to build lay in ruins across half the galaxy. The reconstruction effort required the same kind of creative problem-solving that had won the war. Human engineers worked alongside alien specialists to rebuild industrial complexes using hybrid technologies that neither species could have developed alone. Human economists collaborated with alien financiers to create new trade networks that were more flexible and resilient than the old systems. Dr. Sarah Williams found herself designing a completely new economic framework for the surviving species. The old interspecies credit exchange had been too rigid and centralized. The new system she developed with her alien colleagues was based on adaptive algorithms that could adjust to changing conditions in real time. "We learned from our mistakes," Williams explained to the Economic Council. "The old system worked well in peacetime because it was stable and predictable. But when crisis came, It could not adapt fast enough to survive. The new system is designed to change and grow stronger when it faces challenges. The social changes were even more dramatic than the economic ones. Species that had maintained rigid traditions for thousands of years were learning to embrace change and innovation. The Zalani, once the most traditional warriors in the galaxy, were studying human tactical methods and incorporating them into their ancient military codes. Fleet Admiral Kextor had become one of humanity's strongest supporters in the new council. The proud warrior who had once dismissed human fighting methods as chaotic and undisciplined now understood that adaptability was the highest form of military art. Honor without flexibility is just another word for suicide, Kextor told his officers during a training session where Zalani and human pilots practiced joint maneuvers. Our ancestors were great warriors because they found ways to win. We honor them best by learning new ways to protect what we value. The cultural exchange went both ways. Humans were learning patience and long-term thinking from species that had maintained stable civilizations for millennia. The hasty decisions and short-term focus that had sometimes caused problems for humanity were being tempered by alien wisdom about the importance of considering consequences across generations. High Arbiter Vex Thanor had requested a private meeting with Ambassador Walsh on the anniversary of humanity's return. The former enemy now served as one of Walsh's closest advisors in the new council structure. The meeting took place in the same garden where Vex Thanor had once refused to listen to human pleas for understanding. I have spent the past year thinking about what happened 10 years ago, Vex Thanor said as they walked among flowers that had been replanted after the war. We were afraid of your species because you represented change, and change seemed dangerous to the order we had built. We did not understand that without change, order becomes stagnation, and stagnation leads to death. Walsh listened with the patience that 10 years of exile had taught him. Fear of change is natural, he replied. Every species faces that challenge. The key is learning to direct change toward positive goals rather than trying to prevent it entirely. The new galactic accord that emerged from the reconstruction was unlike anything that had existed before. Instead of a rigid hierarchy with fixed rules, it was a flexible alliance that could adapt to new challenges and opportunities. Decisions were made through consensus building rather than majority rule, ensuring that minority voices were heard and minority needs were met. Human colonies were established throughout the rebuilt regions of council space, but they were integrated. Communities where multiple species lived and worked together. The old system of species-specific territories had proven vulnerable to both external attack and internal stagnation. The new mixed communities were more resilient and more innovative. Dr. Amy Foster finally got the chance to work with her alien colleagues on solving the quantum plague that had killed so many silicon-based beings. The combined research team that included humans, crystalline entities, and mechanical intelligences developed a cure within months of beginning their collaboration. The solution was obvious once we started thinking about it together, Foster explained to the scientific council. Each of our species understood part of the problem, but none of us could see the whole picture alone. The cure required insights from carbon-based biology, silicon-based chemistry, and quantum mechanical physics. No single species had all the knowledge we needed. The success of joint research projects led to an explosion of scientific advancement. Technologies that had been impossible for individual species became routine for integrated teams. Medical treatments that could help multiple types of beings were developed. Engineering projects that combined the best insights from dozens of different species created wonders that surpassed anything from the old civilization. But perhaps the most important change was in how the species of the galaxy thought about each other. The old council had been based on the idea that different species should coexist peacefully while maintaining their separate traditions and territories. The new alliance was based on the idea that different species could work together to create something better than any of them could achieve alone. Commander Lisa Rodriguez, now Director of Integrated Defense, oversaw border patrol fleets that included ships and crews from multiple species. The old system of separate species fleets had been replaced by mixed units that combined different strengths and capabilities. Diversity is our greatest weapon, Rodriguez told the Defense Council during a briefing on border security. The void. Hunters used to be able to predict our responses because each species always reacted the same way. Now they face mixed crews that can think and fight in ways that cannot be predicted or countered.